Hi, I'm John Coddington. I prepared these notes for Drexel students going to Florence in the fall of 2014. Needless to say, I'm more than a little bit jealous of you going. Florence is one of my absolutely favorite cities. And all of you are going on or doing a time-honored tradition of designers traveling afar, seeing what other cultures, what the past and in the past can offer us, and then somehow making it our own. People like Lord Burlington and his successors in England. England would not be the same today if they hadn't gone to visit the works of Palladio and others and created those incredible English manor houses and other places. And certainly contemporary architects like Le Corbusier, his really good book that I recommend to all of you, Travels to the Orient, about his days when they're similar ages you all are, traveling to Greece and Turkey and other places in Europe, in the Middle East, and Tadeo Ando. Many of his formative years were created by his travel around the world. And so let me start with this slide of Florence. And I think one can view this slide as either a sunrise or a sunset. It would be a sunset and sort of the darkness covering Florence if we did not use Florence as something that is of incredible use today. If we only used it as a place to visit and not to take lessons home with us. And so I'm going to talk about actually quite a small project. It's the Library of San Lorenzo by Michelangelo, not a very small architect and an artist. The project consists all of two rooms, sort of a vestibule and then a library. But it is full of content, or at least it's full of content for me, and I find it very useful as a practicing architect. I can take a lot away from it. And so in some ways this is a lecture that hopefully will help prepare your eyes to see and to steal what is useful. All right, so this is not a work by Michelangelo. It's actually a work by, I believe it's a work by McFarlane and Associates, and it's a sort of an incrustation over an existing building. Michelangelo also had to work with existing circumstances in the Library of San Lorenzo. Michelangelo's work is classified as Mannerist, and 19th century and early certainly first half of the 20th century, critics looked on Mannerist architecture as something that was somewhat decadent, that was being infatuated with visual delight, just as this McFarlane project is infatuated with visual delight. But I think the Laurentian Library is much more than that. If we're prepared to see it. Here you can see it as just as sculptural, just as robust as that blob architecture, but I think it's got much more content to it. And so part of what I'll be asking you to do is think about whether our architecture today measures up to the architecture of yesterday, and whether you as designers might be able to raise the bar for us. The library at San Lorenzo was, and here I don't know if my pointer really can't identify it on the screen, but you can see it as a long low building that is popped up just at the very end, and you can see it, the pop-up, which is where the vestibule is right under the Duomo, that you can see there in the background. And then you can see the library itself stretching off actually to the west, if I've got my orientations correct. It was originally commissioned in 1523 by the newly appointed Pope Clement VII, who was Giuliano de' Medici. The de' Medicis, if you don't already know, were a famous family in Florence. Great connoisseurs of the art and supported the arts as probably no other family has quite supported it. In that 1523, Michelangelo was asked to find a site for the library, what Clement VII wanted was one that had to do with economy, as most clients want their architects to do, save them money, and also for utility, make sure that it functions very well. Another sort of basic function of architecture that has lasted through the ages. But why was the library built in the first place? Well, this is a best-selling book called The Swerve by Stephen Greenblatt, a professor up at Harvard. The subtitle of the book is How the World Became Modern. And it's basically a book that focuses on early 14 to mid 1400s, where and it concentrates on a character named Poggio Broccolini, who went around to monasteries throughout Europe and found rare books of antiquity, Greek texts, Latin texts, other famous texts, and that they would pull out of the dusty confines of those monasteries and bring them to patrons like the de' Medicis, because these texts opened up a whole new world, saw the world differently than the medieval mind saw the world. Just to put the Laurentian library, and it's called both the Library of San Lorenzo and the Laurentian Library, and the Laurentian Library is named after Lorenzo the Magnificent, Lorenzo de' Medici, the Laurentian Library. The site is at the Basilica of San Lorenzo, and we'll be getting into that in a little bit. But to give you some context around which the library was commissioned. First of all, you've got people like Broccolini collecting all these books for significant and well-heeled patrons. Also in 1518, Martin Luther was nailing up his 95 Theses, which fundamentally challenged the church. Copernicus published his work on his deathbed in 1543. So a lot of the things that were being discovered in some of these ancient texts were coming up. Lots of fundamental things were being questioned during Pope Clement's reign, Clement VII's reign. He assumed the papacy, as I said, in around 1523-24, just as he was commissioning Michelangelo to do the library. He became pope. Shortly thereafter, he was run out of Rome and sought refuge, and later was arrested by a rival cardinal. Rome was sacked. Clement was put back on the throne by Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, designated Holy Roman Emperor at the time. Charles was no friend of England. England and the Holy Roman Empire, the Spaniards, etc., were sort of consistently at odds with one another. And so it was Clement who denied Henry VIII his divorce. And so all these things were happening at the time that the Laurentian Library began to see the light of day. Precedents. You all are supposed to be using precedents for each and every design that you do. Michelangelo did the same. This is the precedent that was used was built in 1438, the Dominican Library of San Marco in Florence. Perhaps you'll get a chance to visit it. You can see it's on this plan. It's D. That's the that is where the that library is located. It was obviously added on to this Dominican monastery, and the program is really quite simple. You raise the library off the ground to keep the books dry, away from dampness, and you raise it up off the ground to bring in light. And so this was the basic program that was followed by just about each and every library for quite some time afterwards. Here's an interior of Michelangelo's library at San Marco. Here you can see some of the texts. It's been renovated and is more of a museum now. So back to Florence, and here you can, again, I hope you sort of are able to discern the Laurentian Library. Again, the vestibule is right under the dome. That kind of, it's got three windows on top of one another. That's the vestibule, and then leading off to the left from the slide, you'll see sort of a single-story bank of windows, which is the library itself. The outside is no great shakes. Gosh, you never know that some world-class transcendent architecture is enclosed in these walls. In many ways, it's sort of a metaphor of the book. You know, hey, I've got the cover of it, but the content is on the inside. Michelangelo. Here's the courtyard that you can see. What Michelangelo did is that he located it in this monastery, and he built on existing walls of the monastery. You can see the two-story colonnade that had to be kept. Let me go back a slide here. You can see sort of in the foreground just those two-story around the courtyard. That's what it was. It was all two-story before you see that kind of pop-up that Michelangelo did for the library. That's the wonderful courtyard, the cloister that you go through in order to enter the library. Again, as I said before, the program was fairly simple. Michelangelo was to sort of sort out Greek texts, find places for Greek texts, for the Roman texts, for rare books, all those sorts of things. And he met the functional constraints and requirements by Pope Clement VII quite easily. But it's what, in addition, he brought to the library, which is really important. Lots of constraints on Michelangelo. The walls, here you can see, here's a slide. Here you can see some sketches on the left of the stairs in the vestibule, initial sketches of the stairs on the vestibule. We had stairs going up against the wall on a landing, and then into the library. Sort of ghosted in the middle. You can see the drawing of the stairs as they actually exist, And behind that, you can see an image of the library. And then on the right-hand part of the slide, you see this kind of weird and strange vestibule that Michelangelo has created. Here you see the major cloister. See the large stairs. They're designated as number 7. Number 8 is the library itself, and number 5 is that wonderful cloister that you're going to be going through in order to go into the vestibule and eventually into the library. You can see how it's tucked right against the Basilica of San Lorenzo. So remember how this thing is laid out as we go through the slides, because this is part of the narrative that Michelangelo creates, is very much inextricably linked to its place. At least in the beginning, Michelangelo, 1524, 1523 is when he was commissioned. 1524, construction actually started. Didn't get finished until 1571. Michelangelo left Florence in 1534, and so he sent back detailed instructions, well, sometimes detailed, sometimes not so detailed, other sort of clay model form on how the project was to go forward and be completed. Tribolo was an architect who worked on it for Michelangelo. Vasari was another architect. Amonati, he was probably the architect who made the most difference, because he was responsible for those for the stairs in the vestibule that we'll be looking at in later on in the presentation. And so one of the things that Michelangelo had to do, you can see the existing walls that he was building on. He had to fireproof down below where certain monastery functions were in order to protect the books from up above, not too unlike the kind of fireproofing constraints that we have today. And so here you can see the layout, pretty straightforward. The desks where the books are located, right next to the sunlight, central aisleway. Here again, you can see the relationship of the library in relationship to the basilica, and you can see those extraordinary stairs in the vestibule there. Look at the size of the stairs, and remember the size of the stairs in relationship to the space. But this is the slide I was wanting to get to. If you look at the slide, you can see these buttresses that Michelangelo had to or pilasters, we would call them. Ackerman, who wrote a lot about the architecture of Michelangelo, calls them buttresses. But you can see how he had to strengthen the walls of the library in order to tie it into the walls down below. And so so between the windows, you can see these pilasters that begin to set up a rhythm and a discipline, and then that begins to dictate a lot of the work that happens. I want you to also notice on the library side, and as it draws across the facade there, the rounded arches over the windows, even though on On the vestibule, you can see that the windows are in fact blank. They become much more niches on the exterior with the windows actually happening up above. But then you can see those triangulated pediments above the windows in the vestibule. And so probably would have been easier to keep the detail the same. So I want you to remember the difference there. One having to do much more rounded, one having to do with the sort of the triangulated quality of that. And obviously you can see the down pipes coming down from the to drain the roof. And again, you can see how Michelangelo was very much constrained by the two-story cloister that had to remain. You can see the door that you go into. It's a very unpresupposing entrance into this extraordinary place. Here's a section. This is a pretty important section. You can see the incredible thinness of the walls that Michelangelo was having to work with, and you can also see how, particularly in the library, that left-hand portion of the section, how what's happening in the ceiling. The structure in the ceiling lines up. You can see the little dips in the section mark line up exactly with the columns, then that go to a sort of a base, and then eventually into the ground or into the floor area, and then of course the vestibule off there to the right. So both plan and section. So so one of the interesting things is that in Renaissance architecture, the ceiling was viewed as an independent object. It had to do much more with the heavens. Think of the Sistine Chapel or some of the other incredible ceilings of the Renaissance. It was not necessarily to be connected to our more worldly concerns, particularly in whether it had to be in ecclesiastical structures or even monasteries, but anything that had to do with important architecture, the ceiling was separated. Here, Michelangelo, in one of his numerous inventions in this project, all of a sudden connects the ceiling with the walls, and it sets up a kind of structural base system that is seen throughout. You can see the how the columns come in and how they are tied to the beams in the ceiling above. How there's this wonderful quality of light that comes in and illuminates the desk and study area. Here's that incredible ceiling that is constructed in the library itself. Oh my goodness, look at that. There's a direct correlation between the what's happening above and what's happening below. First time that this has ever happened in Renaissance architecture, the connection between what is above and what is below. Here Michelangelo is making a connection between the sacred and the profane, between what happens here on earth and what happens up in the very heavens themselves. And that's one of the things that the Enlightenment brings. And this is a project very much about the Enlightenment, about that which is rational. I can't think of a more rational or more beautiful kind of space than this reading room. It has to do all with rationality, with structure, with rhythm, with proportion, with scale, with a sense of repose. And this is all as a result of the very strict limitations that the limitations of structure that were imposed on Michelangelo by by the site. And so his expressive forms, if you look at some of his early drawings, are much, much more expressive, much more sculptural than what he's able to get away with here. Here he's submitting to the discipline of structure. Here you can see the relationship of the even the furniture. It's not only the walls, the ceiling, and the floor are integrated, but the desks themselves. It's a fully integrated design. Probably the first time we've seen that, and it's as dictated as much by pragmatics as it is by aesthetic. Also, in this room, what is emphasized? The horizontal. The horizontal is the profane dimension. The vertical, obviously, is the sacred dimension. This is a place of the world where one is to find out about the world. This is not in a church, but this is a library. Michelangelo is making distinctions here in the expression of the architecture itself. Also, take a look at the door. I'm sorry that it is blurry, but remember on the facade how we had those sort of rounded arches over the windows for lintels, as well as the triangles. This is where you go in back into the vestibule. This is here Michelangelo combines both of them. Detail of the desks. Remember this desk. Remember the sort of the curves at the bottom of the desk, because we will see how they are recalled, or actually I think probably the desk recalls some of the curves in the vestibule. Really the only place that that happens. Here's a axonometric of the library and the vestibule, where you can get a sense of the spaces that are at play here. Obviously, the library goes on quite a bit further. Again, take a look at the here. You can see the those huge stairs in the vestibule right up above it. You can see the elevation of that. To the right of the elevation in the vestibule, you can see the very much resolved geometries of the library. And to the right of the plan, you can see the elevation of the stairs going up into the library. Here are some early sketches where I think Michelangelo is sort of in denial of the structural constraints he was working under. You can see how the columns are very much pushed forward, which is the traditional way of doing it, and the niches and as part of the design were recessed. But here you can see absolutely the opposite has occurred. Here the columns, if you look at the plan and then look at the elevation, looks like the columns are actually in the recesses, there in the niches. And so what is structure and what is not? Michelangelo is calling into question here in the vestibule. Very clear in the library, not so clear here in the vestibule. The reading room was designed, which is light, it's about calmness, it's conducive to study, it's an integrated design. The opposite happens here in the vestibule. It's entirely different. Here you can see how the structure is actually working, where in fact the columns do support the beams going across. But by the time those forces reach the earth, they are called into question, because look at the volutes below the columns. It looks as though, gosh, the columns are sort of set up on top of these volutes, and they actually go back into the wall. They don't really support, they're not really support, they're there for decorative purposes rather than support purposes. One of the things that Clement didn't want in the original design, and I'm going to have to go back a bunch of slides here. In the original design, Michelangelo wanted the roof of the reading room to be continuous and to go right at that same level across the vestibule. And on top of the vestibule, he then put a lot of skylights. Clement, being the practical guy that he was, thought, oh gosh, all skylights leak, as many of our clients tell us as well. So Michelangelo had to raise the vestibule 9 feet and put those clear story windows in order to allow light in. That made for some incredibly strange dimensions to it. And so the reading room, its dimensions, 152 feet long, 35 feet wide, 28 feet tall. Beautifully proportioned space, half a football field long. The dimensions on the vestibule really quite strange. In plan, you can see it's almost square, 31 feet by 34 feet, 31 feet by 34 feet, but it's 44 feet tall. And so Michelangelo said, all right, these are the dimensions I have to work with. I'm changing the whole nature of the design. I am going to reprogram this space in terms of making it really the opposite of what the library is, if only to better understand the library. And so he makes columns into non-columns, which are really columns. There's a kind of ambiguity that Robert Venturi talks about in complexity and contradiction, particularly with Mannerist architects like Michelangelo. And this ambiguity doesn't have to do with confusion. What Venturi says is what ambiguity does, if it's done correctly, brings richness of meaning, not confusion of meaning. And so one of the things that Michelangelo was positing here in this vestibule is that when you start questioning, hey, are those columns or not really columns, he's inviting you to ascend those stairs and to find out through this thing called knowledge, through this thing called a much more kind of rational understanding of the world. You can see the structure. Here you can see those columns down, and look at over those tabernacles, over those niches. Some have got those triangles over them. Some have got those sort of soft curves over them. But he really extends the columns. He pulls the columns up and makes them into proportions we really don't quite see. We haven't quite seen before. There are the volutes. You can see the columns going up. Another view of the volutes. gosh, look at those capitals. Haven't quite seen those capitals before either. And so even though he's dealing in the classical language, he's being incredibly inventive about the classical language. Boy, how do you turn a corner with all these things going on? Well, one of the things that he does is that he doesn't just have those two walls meet in a corner. But as Ackerman says, they don't meet, they mate. And what Michelangelo does here is that he uses an incredibly modern device. He uses sort of the detailing of the reveal. And so the columns don't touch, but they stay separate from one another, revealing the difference between one wall and the other and calling attention to the corner. And that distance is at least reminiscent for me in the kind of tension that it creates. We find that same kind of tension on the Sistine Chapel. All right, so here's the stairs going up, and there's the elevation of the wall leading into the library. What Michelangelo also does, when you come into this vestibule, even though it's an inside space, it seems as though these are actually outside elevations. And so what is inside and what is outside is also called into question, both literally as well as metaphorically. Look at what happens over the door. All of a sudden, that kind of triangulated piece is broken. Earth might actually be ascending to heaven, or at least attempting to, with the knowledge that is contained there. So the walls to the right and to the left of this particular wall are identical. They are mirror images of each other. But the wall opposite from the stairs, remember, this is the wall that adjoins the basilica, that adjoins the sacred church itself. Now, Michelangelo could have put another niche there. He could have treated it just like he treats the two sides, but he doesn't. He keeps that facade absolutely blank. Why? Well, we really don't know why, but it's because perhaps what he's saying in this age of enlightenment, maybe the church doesn't have much in the way of answers for us. It's mute, it's blank. Or what he's saying is, gosh, it's up for you to determine what is truth and what is not. In many ways, it reminds me of Malevich's White Canvas. It's a Russian constructivist who painted this white canvas. And this white canvas, what this white canvas does, at least according to Malevich and his critics, is that it gives the viewer ultimate freedom in terms of what they want to see in all of its abstraction. Here's another invention that Michelangelo does. Look at this niche, this tabernacle. And if you look closely, I realize the slide is a little bit fuzzy. You will see that the columns on the two sides actually taper down rather than taper up. It's exactly the opposite of what you would consider a column needing, what's necessary for a column to do. You would think a column would would be reversed than that. And here you can see the again that door, and that has got both the triangle as well as the curved cornice above it. And then here are the stairs. It takes way too much room in that one space. It's an alien intruder. It just sort of flows out from the library and into the space. It's monumental, it's iconic, It has very little to do with the rest of the design. Um, where Michelangelo found the freedom to do this is that it just happens that the vault underneath it is incredibly strong. So he didn't have the kinds of structural limits that he had in the library. So he's able to pull out all stops. And so when you come in the door, you are not coming in, as you saw from the elevation opposite from the stairs. You come in from the side. You do not come in on axis. Already, he's asking you to reorient yourself, both literally as metaphorically. And you can see that these the middle stairs are convex, sort of almost pushing you away. They've got slightly different tread lengths on them, creating additional discomfort. And look at the side stairs there. Here you can see the two large spaces. They don't have the balustrade. And so if you go up them, you feel you're a little bit on edge. You don't necessarily have the protection, and so there's a kind of fragility and hazardness, and that is complementary to the stairs' aggressiveness and its sort of outward nature. Another view of the stairs. And then all of a sudden you get these curves, these sorts of mannerist curves, again underneath the columns. And gosh, look at it. Here we see the curves again in the desks themselves. And so the rational and the irrational meet, whether it's in the library, but particularly in the vestibule with all its irresolution. What these two rooms do is that they depend on one another. One would not appreciate the resolution, the calmness, the rationality of the library if you didn't have the vestibule before it. One could not really understand the hope in the view of the Enlightenment about the rational mind if one didn't have the irrational vestibule that presaged it. The memory of one space is directly dependent on the memory of the other. And juxtaposition is really quite very much part of the language that Michelangelo is working with. And it's a language that is still quite useful today. So, how architects, or how might we see the library at San Lorenzo being used today? Well, I think Kahn probably knew about the Laurentian library. Here you can see the facade on Exeter Library, with those large windows allowing light into the depths of the library, and those small windows right there that similar to these that illuminate the desk itself. And you can see how he organized the desks, not too unlike how Michelangelo organized the reading room at the Laurentian Library. And it's interesting how and how he how Kahn integrated these study desks into the rhythm and the structure of the building, just like Michelangelo did as well. So It could be that he used it. It could be that he didn't use it. But there might be something that's timeless in terms of what we can learn from the Laurentian Library in the organization of space and how we bring the book to light, as Kahn would say, how we bring it out of the darkness into the light. The painter Mark Rothko said that he used the vestibule in the Laurentian Library as precedent for the 4 canvases he did for Seagram's. I think the Laurentian Library is very much reflected in Umberto Eco's novel called The Name of the Rose. It's about, again, the 2 different kinds of minds and the juxtapositions in this novel, which I hope each and every one of you will read. Put it in your knapsack for reading in Florence. I think you'll enjoy it. But it's about it's a juxtaposition between the medieval mind and the enlightened mind, in the mysteries, in the intrigues that surround it. And you can see the medieval mind in the vestibule, in the enlightened mind in the library. Daniel Libeskind, I think, uses the idea, in fact, of juxtaposition here in his Jewish History Museum. The rationale of the existing building, very much juxtaposed against a very much mannerist and tension-filled piece of architecture that adjoins it. And the kinds of spaces that Libeskind creates are not too unlike the uncomfortableness that one experiences in the vestibule at the Laurentian Library. And of course, there are the famous stairs that go to nowhere in Libeskind's design, recalling the stairs at Laurentian. And then the Vietnam Memorial, one of the more powerful pieces of 20th century architecture. Michelangelo dealt in the language of opposites, and Maya Lin does too. I mean, the juxtaposition, the opposite of the vestibule in opposition to the reading room. Here in the Vietnam Memorial, it gathers both the 2 arms. One arm points directly at the Washington Monument. The other arm points directly to the Lincoln Memorial, gathers them to the site. Those are dedicated to single men. The Vietnam Memorial is dedicated to the 40,000 plus Americans who lost their lives in that conflict. The Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument rise up. The Vietnam Memorial is depressed in the earth. They're made of white material. This is made of black material. They are opaque. This is reflective and has depth to it. And so it's in that sort of exactness of opposites, not just difference, but opposites. Just like I think that very first project that we looked at by McFarland in France, that was different. The extent to which it was just so exactly opposite, I don't think so. It could have almost been anything. This couldn't have been anything but the way in which it was expressed and executed, similar to the Laurentian Library. So I think there's much to be learned and much to be gleaned from the work of Michelangelo in this diminutive but still very powerful project. And so what are the lessons learned? One is that the past is alive if we see it and make it our own. Program. Michelangelo met Clement VII's program just fine. But he exceeded the program, and he reprogrammed, for instance, the vestibule to make it something that it wasn't intended to at first. And in that programming, he made it a place that people will travel for thousands of miles to come and visit. Subverting architectural language, something that that is done, and that is not something that is modern, but has been done over the ages. But again, going back to Umberto Eco, one of the things that Eco says is that the only way how one can understand a new word is to put it within the context of known words. And so if you've got a sentence of unknown words, that becomes an illegible sentence or an illegible paragraph. But if there is one unknown word in it, there's only one or two inventions within the context of the known, then one adds to one's vocabulary. And this is one of the things that Michelangelo does here at the Laurentian Library. He adds to our vocabulary. And so you have to put the known in juxtaposition with the unknown. You have to combine both consonance and dissonance together in order to create the kinds of juxtapositions and the kinds of meanings that are so essential to the cultural program of architecture. As I set up this lecture, I talked about how the church was under fire, how the Enlightenment in that way of thinking was displacing a previous way of thinking, all the sorts of contemporary issues that confronted life in Michelangelo's time were no less than momentous or more momentous than our times today. And what is interesting is that Michelangelo was able to give expression to those issues that confronted his times and his places, and the aspirations that his culture had and the artists had. So they weren't just reflecting, but they were taking a position on it. And I think we know Michelangelo's position very well if we only enter into the reading room. And so at the end of the day, architecture isn't about space, form, or materiality, but the fact that these are in the service of our culture and the values we want to leave future generations. The value that learning and rational thought trumps cacophony and confusion, and it is only through knowledge that these can be realized. At least that was Michelangelo's position. So enjoy Florence, have fun at the Laurentian Library, and I'll be thinking of you while you're there.